The God of Mischief is back, and he remembers none of his character development past his first bout with the Avengers. In the latest Marvel show on Disney+, our old pal finds himself apprehended by the Time Variance Authority, all with the intent of fixing the mess he's made by stealing the Tesseract. And as you can expect from a show that's planning to jump around the timeline of a massive franchise, there's gonna be plenty of Easter eggs for us to sniff out. Well, let's get started. You just can't introduce time travel to any franchise without eventually getting some kind of time police involved. This time, they're called the Time Variance Authority, TVA for short, and surprise, surprise, they are not a unique invention of the show. They do indeed originate from the comics. But while they do share similarities with their comic book counterpart, the TVA in the show actually seems to have the opposite end goal. Where this group of unique individuals work to prevent timelines from branching off and a multiverse from being created, the TVA in the comics consists mostly of identical clones specifically bred to keep tabs on the multiverse and all of its realities. Gee, I wonder if this might possibly play into a certain upcoming Doctor Strange film. Segueing flawlessly into this entry, there may already be sneaky references to a potential villain for Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness. Take a closer look at that pack of gum that Mobius finds in 1500s France, and notice the blue face on the packaging. It does bear a bit of resemblance to the Marvel villain Nightmare, ruler of the Nightmare realm within the Dream dimensions in the comics. Considering that Mobius alludes to another department when Loki calls the TVA a nightmare, and that the villain actually has a bit of history with Loki from back in his Kid Loki days, this is definitely worth keeping an eye on. Much like the TVA, the Timekeepers are indeed also from the comics. And they're drawn in an impressively accurate 1960s Marvel Comics style. In the comics, the Timekeepers were created by a being known as He Who Remains, the last living director of the TVA, shortly before the end of the last multiverse. Before his death, he created a different group called Time Twisters to guide our new multiverse, only for them to end up causing a lot of chaos instead. Now, it was Thor who intervened here and told He Who Remains what had happened, leading instead to the creation of the Timekeepers. Though this also means that two more timelines were created, one where the Time Twisters died and were replaced by the Timekeepers, and one where the Time Twisters kept sticking around I think I need to lie down for a moment. While the TVA in the comics does largely consist of clones, there do exist a few unique characters within it, and of course, they make it into the show as well. Most prominently, we have Agent Mobius, who is played by none other than Mr. Wow himself, Owen Wilson. As Executive Senior Manager of the TVA, Mobius M. Mobius, Moby to his friends, was first introduced getting on the Fantastic Four's case, accusing them of a number of time crimes, though the group managed to escape their charges. He also served as judge in a famous She-Hulk story where she messed with the timeline by warning Hawkeye of his coming death. Who knows, Mobius might just show up again whenever those Hawkeye and She-Hulk series come around. But we're not quite done with the TVA's employees just yet. The judge that Loki is brought before during his time in TVA custody is actually credited as yet another comics character, Ravonna Renslayer. What's significant about this is that in the comics, Ravonna was the daughter of King Corellius, who ruled in an alternate 40th century Earth, which just so happens to be one of the few civilizations spared by the time-traveling supervillain Kang the Conqueror, since he had a thing for Princess Renslayer. Oh, and in case you forgot, Kang is slated to appear in the upcoming Ant-Man film Ant-Man Quantumania. Man, are there any future MCU projects this show isn't connected to? Oh, never mind. This is a time travel show. It's a stupid question. Now, we all have our vices. Some people smoke. Some people chew nightmare gum. And Agent Mobius drinks energy drinks. Discontinued energy drinks, that is. More specifically, the drink we see him open and that he offers Loki a sip of is actually a can of Josta, which was the first major energy drink introduced in the US in 1995. It even had a commercial where an older man tells his past self to do the good stuff now while he's young, which seems apt for a show about time travel. Josta was discontinued in 1999, but hey, being a time traveler clearly has its perks. Now this one is probably here just for fun, but after Loki gets arrested and the Tesseract confiscated, you can at one point hear a TVA employee referring to him as a criminal with a blue box.
I know you. You're that criminal with the blue box.
Now, if you enjoy time travel fiction, this probably sounds similar to another famous time traveler with a blue box that the resident time police aren't overly fond of. Namely, the Doctor and their iconic TARDIS, almost always seen in the shape of a blue British 1960s police box. I don't see Loki handing out jelly babies or trying on fezzes anytime soon, though. Now, just in case you forgot that Loki is the God of Mischief, Mobius is kind enough to show us footage of an old memory where Loki hijacks a plane and steals $200,000 back in 1971 due to losing a bet with Thor. But this, and the name D.B. Cooper, is not something Marvel made up just to show Loki messing around. D.B. Cooper was the pseudonym of a real person who really did hijack a plane, demand a sum of $200,000, and parachute off the plane once he got what he wanted. The real D.B. Cooper was never found or identified after his daring caper either, so it all lines up with Loki's shenanigans pretty neatly. Though I wonder what kind of bets he and Thor were making back then that requires hijacking a freaking plane. Anyone who works in any kind of bureaucracy can nod in agreement when Mobius talks about endless paperwork, but it's actually worth paying attention to some of it in this episode. Loki's arrest form is full of interesting details, like listing his sex as fluid, referring to his time spent as Lady Loki in the comics. It also lists his native time sector as 1900 to 2099, referring to the 2099 line of Marvel comics that sprung up in the 90s, featuring new characters taking up the legacy of several Marvel superheroes. And the tape of Loki's memories is labeled as ETH-616. Just a random number, right? Nope. In the comics, where the multiverses are categorized by numbers, Earth-616 just so happens to be the prime Marvel Comics universe that we all know. Guess Mobius isn't kidding when he says he's a fan. Now, we're still in the beginning phases of this show, but with a revelation at the end of this episode, I have a sneaking suspicion that things are going to pick up speed pretty soon. And with a potentially endless supply of timelines, time periods, and places to go, there will no doubt be Easter eggs and references to all corners of the Marvel Universe up the wazoo.